The moving truck was halfway into the neighborhood when she stepped out like a traffic cop on a power trip. "Absolutely not," the woman yelled, standing with her arms crossed in the middle of the road. "You can't bring that here." HOA rules forbid large vehicles during daytime hours. I leaned out of the truck window, hot, tired, and 2 states away from the sanity I once called home. "Ma'am, it's 10 in the morning. I called ahead. Your HOA president gave me written approval," she scoffed loudly. "I am the HOA vice president and I didn't approve anything. I'm Opal Anderson and this truck is blocking the aesthetic integrity of the community." Aesthetic integrity. My name's Quentin Granger. I just bought my first home in the Willow Bend community, and if this was a preview of my neighbors, I was in for a ride. My wife and daughter were following behind in our SUV, watching this unfold with wide eyes. I climbed down from the truck. "Look, Opal, I'm not here to fight. I've got a written email from Harold, your president. He said we'd be fine to unload today." Opal didn't even look at the paper I held up. "Harold's out of town. I'm acting president." And I say no. Then, like she'd rehearsed it, she walked straight to her car, a spotless white Lexus parked conveniently on the edge of the cul-de-sac, and reversed it, blocking the entire street so the moving truck couldn't enter. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "I'm well within my authority," she said through her cracked window. "You can park outside the gate and carry your items. Rules are rules." My wife Olivia stepped out of the SUV, holding our daughter Freya's hand. "Is she serious?" she asked, staring at me like I was pulling a prank. "Oh, she's dead serious," I said. "But so am I." I called the moving company and had them unload everything outside the gate. It took hours. I hauled every box, every chair, every lamp, all 2,000 pounds of our life, one dolly trip at a time, while Opal sat smugly in her car, sipping a thermos of herbal tea like she was queen of the cul-de-sac. When I was done, I walked past her window, drenched in sweat. "You messed with the wrong guy, Opal," she smiled faintly. "Welcome to Willow Bend, read your bylaws." And just like that, she drove off. The next morning, I had the moving truck towed directly in front of her driveway, and I left it there, for 7 days. Blocked her in so tight she couldn't back out without a helicopter. Day 1, she came banging on my door at 7 a.m. "Move that truck or I'll fine you." "You mean the one that's not technically on your property?" I asked, sipping my coffee on the front steps. "It's parked on a public street." "Your bylaws don't apply. You're obstructing my right to leave." "Funny, I thought that was a rule you liked enforcing." She stormed off, yelling something about legal action. But until then, I had all the time in the world and a very patient truck driver who, after hearing what happened, agreed to let the vehicle sit there for a week. For free. By day 3, neighbors started whispering. By day 5, someone taped a sign to the truck. "HOA Queen's carriage has been dethroned." And by day 7, Opal called an emergency HOA meeting. That's when things really started to unravel. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse, a beige stucco building that looked like it had been decorated by someone legally restricted from using color. When I walked in, I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes shift to me, some curious, some irritated, a few amused. I wasn't a resident long enough to earn allies, but after what happened, I definitely wasn't invisible. Opal stood at the front near a whiteboard covered in hastily drawn diagrams of the community layout. She clutched a clipboard like it was a sacred artifact. Harold, the actual president, had apparently cut his vacation short and looked like he regretted every second of that decision. He cleared his throat. "Let's keep this civil. We're here to address a recent disruption." Opal didn't wait. "This man," she jabbed a finger toward me, "deliberately blocked access to my property with a commercial vehicle, creating a safety hazard and violating the principles of our community charter. We need to vote on immediate sanctions." "Actually," I said, stepping forward, "there's no violation. The truck was parked legally on a public street. I checked city code before I did anything." A murmur passed through the room. A man in a fishing hat leaned over to whisper something to a woman with a poodle in her lap. Opal's jaw clenched. "Regardless of technicalities," she snapped. "This behavior undermines the authority of the HOA. We can't have residents taking matters into their own hands whenever they disagree with enforcement." "You mean like blocking a moving truck without cause?" I asked. "Or refusing to acknowledge a written approval from the HOA president?" Harold raised both hands. "Okay, let's not turn this into a shouting match." "It's not a match," I replied. "It's a pattern of abuse. I've spoken to 5 families on my block. All of them have had issues with Opal arbitrarily enforcing rules, issuing warnings for things that aren't in the bylaws and threatening fines without board approval." That changed the air in the room. People shifted in their seats. A woman near the back raised her hand. "Last year she tried to fine me $500 for putting up solar lights," she said. "They're not even visible from the street." A man in a pressed flannel shirt followed. "She claimed my garage door paint was too matte. I had to repaint it twice." No one else complained. Opal's eyes narrowed. "Those were legitimate aesthetic concerns. We have standards." "What we have," I said, "is a vice president acting like a dictator while the rest of the board is either absent or intimidated." Harold pinched the bridge of his nose. "Let's table the sanctions discussion. We need to review the charter and investigate the enforcement history before making any decisions." Opal opened her mouth, but he cut her off. "That's final." After the meeting, I was approached by 2 families who offered to help organize a neighborhood review. They'd been fed up for years but never had the leverage to push back. I told them I wasn't trying to start a war, I just wanted fairness. That night, I pulled out my laptop and started digging. Willow Bend's HOA bylaws were public record, but what interested me more was the financials. I filed a public records request with the county to obtain their annual budgets and expenditure reports from the last 4 years. What I found wasn't just petty. It was criminal. Tens of thousands of dollars listed under community landscaping were being paid to a company called Green Shore Solutions LLC. I cross-referenced the business registration. The owner, Owen Anderson, Opal's son. There were no competing bids on record, no audit trail, no performance reviews, just automatic monthly payments increasing every year. I printed everything out, added it to a binder, and scheduled a meeting with Harold. When I arrived at his house, he looked exhausted. "She's been vice president for 6 years, he said after I showed him the documents. "I let her manage the maintenance budget because I didn't have time. I run a business. I never thought to check where the money was going." "Well, now you know," I said, "and if you don't act, I will." "I've already spoken to a municipal attorney. This is embezzlement," he nodded slowly. "We'll call a special board meeting. I need to talk to legal counsel." The next week, flyers went out to every home. Harold scheduled a full audit of HOA finances and suspended Opal from any financial oversight pending the investigation. When the notice went up on the HOA bulletin board, someone added a sticky note beneath it that simply read, "About time." Opal didn't take it quietly. She marched up to my house with a clipboard and 2 other board members in tow. They didn't say a word. She did all the talking. "You've manipulated this community with half-truths and slander," she barked. "You think you're some kind of crusader. You're just a troublemaker." I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. "Troublemakers don't bring receipts, embezzlers do." "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed. "You've made powerful enemies. Then they should have stayed honest." That night, someone egged my front door. My security cameras caught a hooded figure, but they turned away from the lens. Still, I filed a police report. I also uploaded the footage to the neighborhood forum with a caption, "Someone's scared of the truth." The next morning, Harold called. The city had launched an inquiry into HOA misuse of funds. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit was reviewing the Green Shore contracts, and just like that, Opal's kingdom began to crumble. Neighbors who had been quiet for years began to speak up. One by one, they brought forward emails, letters, and photos, evidence of manipulated citations, threats of fines, and fabricated maintenance violations. A retired postal worker down the street revealed he'd been keeping a log of every HOA notice he'd received and had matched them to dates when he saw Opal snooping around on properties. A week later, a city investigator showed up at the clubhouse with a warrant. They seized HOA financial records and computer hard drives. Opal claimed it was a misunderstanding. She even tried to blame Harold for negligent oversight. But the paper trail led straight to her. The next board meeting was standing room only. Opal showed up, but no one would sit next to her. When Harold announced she was being removed from the board pending the results of the investigation, no one objected. In fact, someone clapped. She stood, shook with fury, and stormed out. That night, I stood on my driveway watching the sun go down. Olivia leaned against my shoulder. "I didn't expect any of this," she said quietly. "Neither did I replied. "I just wanted to move in." Freya ran past us, trailing a kite she'd built with one of the neighbor kids. For the first time since we'd arrived, the block felt alive. People were outside, talking, sharing, smiling. I didn't come here to be a hero. But if standing up to someone like Opal meant others could finally breathe, then maybe this place could become the home we hoped for when we first drove in. And I still had one more trick up my sleeve. 3 days after the city investigator hauled off the HOA's records, a plain white envelope appeared on my doorstep. No return address, no postage, just my name, written in shaky blue ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a typed list of vendor payments from the past year, all labeled Community Beautification Fund. The name at the bottom, Delaney's Grounds and Stonework, caught my attention. It wasn't Green Shore Solutions, the company run by Opal's son. It was a different contractor entirely. I scanned the amounts. They totaled over $30,000, but the HOA ledger I'd pulled from public records showed no mention of Delaney's. Someone was double billing under 2 different names. I walked straight to Harold's house. "She used a second shell company," I said, handing him the sheet. He stared at it in disbelief. "I thought Green Shore was the only one. Someone dropped this off anonymously. She's laundering funds through multiple fronts." Harold ran both hands through his hair. "Delaney's doesn't even exist in the city contractor database. I checked last month when the board approved a stone path project. Now I know why I couldn't find anything." I contacted Detective Rivas, the financial crimes investigator assigned to the case. He asked for a scanned copy and called me back within hours. "This changes our scope," he said. "We thought we were dealing with nepotism and illegal contracting. Now it's wire fraud and falsification of public financials. That's a whole different bracket." He asked to meet in person. I agreed. When I arrived at the precinct, Rivas was already waiting in a side room with a man wearing a Department of Housing badge. They had a folder open on the table. "Your HOA's been flagged in 3 separate complaints over the last 15 years, Rivas explained. "But there was never enough to open a case. This time, we have hard evidence." The agent from Housing added, "If Opal Anderson funneled money through fake vendors while acting in an elected capacity, she could face felony charges." They asked me to testify if the case went to court. I didn't hesitate. Back in Willow Bend, the rumor mill was on fire. A few residents had spotted unmarked cars outside the clubhouse. The HOA's website went offline. The weekly newsletter, usually filled with reminders about lawn height and acceptable trim colors, didn't go out at all. Then came the board vote. Harold called a public session at the town's community center rather than the clubhouse, citing space concerns. Over 80 residents showed up, more than double the previous record. A local reporter sat quietly in the back with a notepad, eyes flicking up with every new revelation. Harold stood at the front with 2 large binders in his hands. "We've confirmed that multiple vendor payments were falsified. An outside audit revealed that at least $43,000 in HOA funds were funneled through fictitious companies." Opal wasn't present. Her seat at the table sat empty, her nameplate turned upside down. One board member, a retired CPA named Linda, stepped forward. The board moves to permanently remove Opal Anderson from any position of authority within the HOA. We also recommend full cooperation with law enforcement. The vote passed unanimously. A few claps started, not loud but steady. Afterward, one of the longtime residents approached me. He wore a faded army cap and walked with a cane. "You're not just the new guy anymore," he said. "You gave this place its spine back." I shook his hand. "I just wanted to move in without being bullied," he chuckled. Funny how the little fights turn into the big ones. That night I got a call from Rivas again. "We executed a warrant at Opal's house this morning," he said. "She wasn't there, but we recovered multiple laptops, hard drives, and banking documents. We also found records indicating she'd been processing payments under other names' identities we believe were stolen from former residents who moved out years ago." I sat down slowly. "She was using their names to create ghost vendors, correct? We're coordinating with the district attorney. When we find her, she'll be facing charges for identity fraud, wire fraud, and misappropriation of funds." It was surreal. The woman who had once blocked my moving truck because she didn't like how it looked was now a fugitive under investigation for felony-level fraud. Her arrogance had been a mask for something much darker. 2 days later, the police found her. She'd been staying with her sister on the other side of the state, trying to liquidate assets and move money into offshore accounts. They arrested her at a gas station just off the interstate. According to the officer's report, she was trying to pay for fuel with a prepaid debit card registered under another fake business name. The mugshot hit local news within hours. Her expression, rigid, pale, eyes darting left, was a far cry from the controlling woman who once parked her Lexus sideways in the street to enforce an imagined rule. The next HOA meeting was standing room only again. This time, the tone was different. Harold opened the floor for community reform suggestions. For the first time in years, people actually spoke. A nurse from the corner house proposed a rotating committee of residents to review citations before fines could be issued. A retired traffic engineer offered to redesign the neighborhood's parking restrictions to align with city codes rather than arbitrary preferences. A young couple suggested a community fund for hardship cases, after revealing they'd once been fined for leaving a second-hand crib on their porch for 3 hours while moving. I sat in the back, listening, watching. After the meeting, Harold approached me. "We're rewriting the bylaws from scratch. Transparent, fair, resident approved. I want you on the committee." I shook my head. "I'm not a politician." "You're something better," he said. "You know how to stand your ground." I agreed, on one condition: we'd publish every board meeting's minutes online, accessible to all residents, with a section for anonymous questions and concerns. He smiled. Deal. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed in ways no one expected. People who had barely spoken to each other started hosting block dinners. Kids played in yards without parents worrying about measuring trampoline heights. The clubhouse, once a place of dread, became a co-working space 2 days a week, organized by a freelance graphic designer down the street who offered to repaint the walls for free. And the moving truck. I paid the driver double and sent him a thank you gift basket with a note. "You helped more than you know." As for Opal, she was denied bail. The DA filed 9 felony charges, and the state opened an inquiry into other HOAs she'd previously served on. Turns out Willow Bend wasn't her first playground, it was just the last one she'd get to control. One evening, as I walked Freya down the sidewalk, she looked up at me and asked, "Are you still mad about the lady who yelled at us?" I thought about it. About all that anger, all that wasted energy she'd poured into controlling others. "No," I said, "she doesn't matter anymore." And for the first time since crossing that gate, I believed it. Justice had rolled in like a slow-moving truck, and this time nothing was blocking it. By the time Opal was arraigned, Willow Bend had changed so much it felt like a different neighborhood. The clubhouse walls were freshly painted a soft sage green, and the old corkboard of passive-aggressive notices had been replaced with a sleek community info screen, wired up by a teenager on the block who was saving for college. There was no more whispering about who might get fined next. People actually lingered after meetings now. There was laughter. Still, what came next wasn't laughter, it was federal. 2 weeks after Opal's arrest, I got a call from a woman named Jenna Klein. She introduced herself as an investigator with the Office of the Inspector General. Her voice was calm and clipped, like someone used to people thinking they had nothing to hide. "I understand you were the first to publicly raise concerns about Willow Bend's HOA financial practices," she said. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "That's right. But I thought the city was already handling it." "They are," she said. "But this goes beyond local jurisdiction now. We've found traces of federal housing grant funds being diverted through shell vendors, funds meant for community development." I sat back in my chair. "You're saying she stole federal money?" "At least $72,000 across 3 fiscal years, and it wasn't just Opal. We believe she had help." That hit harder than I expected. I'd hoped it was just one rotten branch. Turns out the roots were tangled deeper. Jenna asked if I had noticed any patterns, board members who never spoke but always voted with Opal, vendors who never showed up to do work, that sort of thing. I told her about the landscaping that was supposedly redone last spring but looked exactly the same, and the security upgrades that never materialized despite a $2,500 line item. She thanked me and said I might be contacted again if the case went to trial. The next day, Harold called and asked to meet privately. We sat on his porch, both of us nursing mugs of tea as a warm breeze rustled through the pine trees lining the street. "I got a subpoena," he said flatly. "So did 2 other board members. Jenna Klein, she's not just auditing, she's building a case." "Did you know?" I asked. He shook his head. "I knew Opal was overbearing. I didn't know she was stealing, but I also didn't ask enough questions. That's on me." I let the silence hang between us. After a moment, he added, "I'm stepping down at the end of the quarter. Someone else should lead now. Someone who's earned the trust of this community." I looked at him, then away. "Don't say what I think you're about to say." He smiled, not arrogantly, just tired. "You don't have to decide now, but the board will nominate you officially next week." 2 days later, the agents returned. This time, they had a wider net. A man named Curtis Bell, formerly the HOA treasurer, was arrested at his office downtown. He'd been the one processing the secondary payments to the fake companies. Turns out his sister-in-law was listed as the owner of one of the LLCs. She'd already agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. The paper trail was airtight. Within a week, 4 more homes in Willow Bend had search warrants executed. Laptops, tablets, and filing boxes were taken. The neighborhood buzzed, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was relief. Then came the day of the trial. The courthouse was packed. I sat in the gallery, just behind the rows reserved for press and witnesses. Opal looked smaller than I remembered, her wrists swallowed by the sleeves of a beige cardigan, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. The prosecutor began by laying out the charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, misuse of federal funds, falsifying tax documentation, and obstruction of justice. Each count was backed by evidence: emails, forged invoices, bank transfers. But what struck me most was the witness testimony. A former HOA secretary, a quiet woman named Rachel, described how Opal pressured her into signing off on expenses without explanations. "She said it was easier that way," Rachel said. "And when I asked questions, she reminded me the HOA could remove me for non-compliance with board cohesion. That's not even a thing, but I believed her." Then came the city auditor, who confirmed the HOA had applied for and received federal community improvement grants under false pretenses. The grants were supposed to fund walking trails and storm drainage upgrades. None of those projects ever broke ground. When it was my turn, I told them exactly what had happened that first day. The truck, the blockade, the absurdity of it all. But then I explained what I'd found, how I traced the shell companies, how neighbors came forward, how the truth unraveled. The defense tried to argue that Opal had been misled by contractors and overwhelmed by administrative burden. But the jury didn't buy it, not with the sheer volume of forged documents and the evidence of personal spending from HOA accounts, including flights, spa retreats, and a suspiciously timed payment to a consultant who turned out to be her nephew's roommate. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, Opal didn't react. Not a twitch. She just stared straight ahead, hands folded neatly in her lap. The judge ordered her held without bail pending sentencing. Outside the courthouse, a small group of Willow Bend residents quietly celebrated. No signs. No speeches, just hugs, handshakes, and a few tears. Back in the neighborhood, change continued. The bylaws were rewritten from scratch under an interim committee. The new rules were simple, transparent, and balanced. No more arbitrary fines, no more backroom decisions. Every dollar spent now had to be approved in open meetings, and residents could audit the budget anytime. I did end up accepting the board nomination reluctantly. Not because I wanted the position, but because I knew what could happen if no one watched the gate. People supported it, not because I was perfect, but because I'd stood up when it counted. We launched a community repair fund using the restitution money the court ordered Opal and Curtis to repay. It wasn't enough to undo everything, but it was a start. The first project we funded was the walking trail that had been promised years ago. We made sure it got built with benches, lights, and even a spot for a community garden. One evening, as I was helping install a plaque near the trailhead, a boy about 10 years old wandered over holding a soccer ball. "Are you the guy who stopped all the bad HOA stuff?" he asked. I laughed. "I helped. A lot of people did." He looked at the plaque, then back at me. "My dad said you made the neighborhood safe again." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Later that night, Olivia and I sat on the porch while Freya drew chalk animals on the driveway. The air was cool and smelled like fresh mulch from the new planters by the clubhouse. "You think she'll ever come back?" Olivia asked. I shook my head. "Not after the sentencing. She'll be gone a long time." "Good," she said. "This place finally feels like home." And it did, not because everything was perfect, but because people had learned to look out for each other. Because power had been put back in the hands of the many, not the few. And because sometimes the best way to fix a broken system is to park a moving truck right in its way and wait for the truth to catch up.